live demo from Adrian shortly. But before that, I'd like to invite any responses from the panel to anything that's been said today. Sorry, more volume. So, Frank first.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, Dave. Wow, I didn't realise I'd come here and get called a fascist. But I have to ask. I can't help but notice that you're wearing glasses. And is this not an enhancement by the man to press gang you into me being a better worker?
Certainly, first of all, it's not enhancement; it's a correction of an impairment. That's that, and I think that distinction.
But the impairment is a framing. You just said that we're to avoid framing disability in that way.
It's real. If I take my glasses off, I can't see the slightest thing that's going on in the back of the room. That's it. But I just want to be really clear about that. I knew that as soon as I used that word fascist, people said, "You're calling me a fascist." No, I'm not calling you a fascist. The point is, the road to fascism, right, the road to hell, is paved with good intentions. You know, we don't. You know, that's the problem with technocracy. As does capitalism, it thrives on the positive energies of people, and the results end up being, unfortunately, very oppressive and very damaging to the planet. I haven't even talked about you know, technology and the technocracy and the environmental crisis. But, okay.
One thing I will ask Dave before, to avoid press gang, with regards to wearables, we recently had a cyber panel on wearables. What you said about observation of the worker was raised around where these wearable devices are actually being used, not just as consumer goods, but inside warehouses to track workers. I just wondered how that works within your framework of Low 200.
I think it's just the classic example of the way that, you know, corporations have always used technology to discipline workers. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me just start by saying I can see the association with fascism. I think there is a sense in which one has to take on board that legacy. So it's a sense in which I don't wish to deny the history of this. But there is an outstanding problem, and that is what's left of the conception of the human once you abstract away the history of science and technology. Because for better or worse, right, human beings have been on this project to distinguish themselves from animals. And in many ways to raise themselves up, and that has been very much part of what defines us as creatures. For better or worse, it's had a lot of disastrous consequences, but that is part of the self-definition of humanity. And I really don't have a clear sense of what a human being is once you strip away all that history and you disown it. Okay, because in a sense, one can see, you know, you don't talk about the positive sides of all those horrible things, but there, as you alluded to, there are positive sides, and those are the ones that in fact define us as human. And so transhumanists, for example, part of their pitch is to say we're just continuing this history. So in other words, they'll take on board your history and say, and this in fact is what led us to where we are today, and it's not so bad, and we can go further. Okay. And the other point I'd want to raise, too, is with regard to the disability issue. I also take your point that I think there is this enormous discrimination about disabilities, and of course, when one thinks about the eugenics past of transhumanism, yes, that's all true, too. But what if one looks at the so-called disability idea somewhat differently and say, okay, we have these differently enabled people, right, who lack certain things other people have, but as a result, have developed other kinds of capacities as compensation and, you know, maybe other things as well. And we want to model that because we might be able to make an enhancement out of it that is more generally available to people. You see what I mean? So in other words, you take on board the fact that people who are nominally disabled actually have powers that the normally able people don't have, and you want to actually understand that and model that because there may be actually some prosthetic value in that for the normally enhanced people. Now, do you object to that? Because that's part of this whole transhumanism thing, too. Okay. There's enough for you there.
Yeah, there was a lot there, and quite a bit of it went that way. But I will just say, I mean, again, I'll have to say it over and over again, I always do. I'm not about disowning or the history of science and technology, or saying that it's all a terrible mistake. No, that's not what I'm saying. And you're right, the transhumanists do say, yes, we're continuing this project of technocracy, it's great. As I say, I think those people really are fascists. They're very clear.
Don't name names, please.
But I mean, in response to this last question that you raised, my response would be, let's have an equal society first. Let's have a society where disability oppression is not here anymore. Let's have a society in which we don't have these class hierarchies and massive hierarchies of wealth. And we don't have a society based on competitive individualism. Then we can start thinking about maybe we'll start to use these enhancements.
Yeah, no trouble. Is this working? Oh, it is working now. Okay. So I'd like to respond to both of those and say that that it's really about the framing of our arguments, and that's why I'd go back to thinking about what are the alternatives for thinking about our identity. And whilst I absolutely agree with Steve that in some ways there was an excellent set of lectures by Bruno Latour called the Gifford Lectures. And essentially, he's talking about nature as a kind of secular religion. And there was a question that came from the audience, which was about the Anthropocene. And the question went, well, why are we calling it the Anthropocene when in fact it's the Christian Pocene? That the values that are shaping an image of humanity are based in a Christian doctrine. So Latour's response to that was to actually drop the notion of human. So he didn't call these ecological beings that were embracing this framing of nature as being post-human. He called them the earthbound because they had an interrelationship with their environment. So that if, for example, the humans left the planet, they'd actually have to, it's like Dracula, it has to take some earth with it. So I think Steve's absolutely right. We don't actually have the discourses that position alternatives to notions of humanity in ways that are framed that we can recognise. But I absolutely am sympathetic to Dave's politics. I think that there are embedded politics in these dichotomies that have been set up through the 20th century, whether it's just simply dualistic. Well, are you for the machines or are you not? And I think that there are alternatives. I think that in an age where we have got, process philosophy is now, asserting itself in the sense that, matter from the scientific enlightenment is seen to be dumb, inert, and brute. And now you've kind of got these hybrid ideas where you've got things like agentized materialism and what's the other one? Essentially that sort of vital materialism, and so you're kind of trying to bring together phenomenology, this idea of relational identity, together with this idea of matter, and kind of re-empower the material world, so it has this capacity to act without us. In other words, Earth had a history before humans came. And actually, we haven't really articulated that. And I think that, cultural theorists, philosophers, people from the humanities are starting to try to engage with that. And I think it is setting a really exciting stage. And I don't think we have the answers. And I think that panels like this really start to, become very meaningful as a hub of conversation that I think are starting to talk about some really important issues that are going to face us throughout this next millennium.
One thing I want to ask the panel before we open this up to the audience is, how do you feel that audiences such as this that we have today at Cyber Salon can get involved in whether it's specifically what you're doing or the thinking around what you're doing, or exploring, for example, what you're doing, Frank? I just want to open it up to the panel if anyone's got any.
How can everyone get involved in what I'm doing? Give me money. Hearing aids are expensive. Good, that's it. How can you get involved? Well, I think at least the work that I'm doing with hearing Wi-Fi, the output will finally be all the processing will occur on a smartphone, and so there's no reason why anyone here wouldn't be able to download it, stick their headphones in it, and experience that same kind of augmented reality as I would be. I think the main difference for me is that I'm going to set this up so it is constantly there, so it just becomes a function of my hearing where I don't even choose to do it or not, which is why I'm working with Daniel Jones. Someone advised me, said don't let an engineer do it because it will sound awful. Go and get a sound designer, they'll make it sound nice, something you can bear listening to all day. So really, I think for most people here it would be to explore hearing as a platform for high bandwidth data aggregation. Google Glass, I think, it's just a really, really rubbish idea because your bandwidth, your visual bandwidth is very, very small. If something happens in your field of vision, you have to focus upon it, and your focus is a very small area, and so it doesn't really make sense to have an interface which demands that much attention, and it's much, much easier, I think, to have an interface, if you can interface it in that way, that is just in your background all the time.
I think from my point of view, maybe if anyone has any acquaintances who is in the hospital or has an amputation, just to let them know that high-tech prosthetics are available, and very nice aesthetic prosthetics as well. So I think that just gives them a bit of hope that they'll be able to get back to really normal life and be happy with their new limb.
Since I'm an academic, I mean, well, you could buy books of mine, but that's not really the answer I want to give. I think a very important part of taking this whole discussion forward is actually integrating it into ordinary curriculum, right? So it doesn't get seen as just this science fiction freak show. So, for example, so one of the things that I would say, on behalf of what Dave presented was he actually gives a relatively familiar historical context for thinking about this matter, right? By giving you kind of the history of the modern age and how it emerged and how these things we're thinking about now are really kind of naturally emergent features of that. I think we need more of that kind of historical humanistic integration of all these discussions. And to give you one example of the sort of thing that I'll be doing next month in March for the British Science Festival, I'm actually going to be giving a keynote address to children. If you remember Cheltenham, yeah? I've been talking to children a lot lately, basically trying to get them at the teenage years to start to think about these issues, right? Because they can often very instinctively relate to them through science fiction, the things they see on TV, films, video games, and often they're on top of even these cutting-edge developments much more than the parents are. And so I do think, normalizing the discussion, right, is a very important part.
Okay, I want to open up for questions, but before I do, if I could ask Adrian to come forward to get mic'd up, and if Dave, you could... Okay,
I just wanted to answer the question you just asked. Is that... Okay, well, I think I can still hear me while listening, right? I just wanted to say, this is a bit of a shameless plug, but I'm sorry, he practiced it. That if the kind of things that I said to you, that I said today, made sense to you, and talking about talking about technology in a really political way. In a few months, we're organising an event called Breaking the Frame. It's a gathering on the politics of technology, and it's looking at technology across the whole spectrum: nuclear, cyborgs, GM foods, drones, the whole bit. So if you're interested in that, we're trying to start a new movement that really takes technology seriously as political. So if you're interested in that, you can get a leaflet from me afterwards.
If I mentioned to just swap mics for Adrian.
Yep.
And for my sins, I'm going to ask for questions from the Cyber Sound audience. See how this goes. So if anyone's got any questions, please. I'm going to take 3 and then we'll bring it back to the panel to respond.
I was very interested in the fact that of all the people who've actually had enhancements or augmentations, they didn't stress so much the mechanistic character of the enhancement. For Neil and for Veronica and for Frank and for Nigel, there was almost a flavour through greater aesthetic appreciation of a spiritual enhancement as well. And so, in that light, I wanted to ask the panel a kind of devil's advocate question. Is religion a human enhancement?
All right. Any other questions?
You did say you were going to take 3 questions and then throw it to us.
3 questions. 3 questions, and we'll bring it back to the panel. No.
It's not so much a question, but just a comment to be answered. Charlotte Wilkes from the Twitter stream, who's been watching live, I think. Any dates set yet for the politics and technology session just mentioned? Sounds ace.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, I'll say it's the 2nd to the 5th of May. Right, which kind of may indicate where I stand a bit. I just wanted to say that I was kind of interested by the fact that more than one person on the panel was going on about age. Yuck. You know, like, well, what's really great about my implant is that it's going to keep me young, and it's still going to be going magnificently when you lot have all kind of disintegrated. And, you know, frankly, as one of the older people in this audience, I don't think I'm doing too badly. And I think that one of the things that patriarchal capitalism does really well is make us terrified. It makes us terrified of getting old, it makes us terrified of getting disabled, it makes us terrified of being in any way different from everybody else, and we all react, you know. I mean, I have the most incredible sympathy for people, you know, who have to deal with you know, being looked at and stared at and having people be nasty to you in the street. You know, I've kind of experienced some of that in a very minor kind of way, and you know, I'm not putting that down, but I think that, you know, we have to look at all of this in a societal context, and the whole way that technology is being pushed on us as to make us consume more, and I think, as while I'm talking about age, to say that what actually got me into thinking about the politics of technology was the terror that I felt watching my teenage son be completely consumed by this screen in his bedroom, and all the parents that I knew being really terrified of that as well. And I don't think that the isolation, like young men committing suicide in Japan, for example, because of the isolation they feel, this is the complete antithesis, it seems to me, of community and developing useful technology. So I think we should avoid it.
One last question. Thank you. Over the last 5 years, there seems to be a dissemination of literature on the subject of moral enhancement. I was just wondering from the speakers here what their reaction to that prospect of morally enhancing a character through biotechnology and advances in neuropharmacology. Thank you. So we have, is religion an enhancement? Where does the panel stand on moral enhancement, which may go together? And also the issues around generational issues, it seems.
I was going to say, I think Nigel wants to answer that one on the morals.
Yeah, I mean, whose moral standards are you going by? Your morals are probably different to mine, and mine are definitely different to the person who's going to make the rules. So whose morals do you go by? I mean, at the end of the day, morals are something you have, and they're something that you work on yourself. Now, if you think something is morally wrong and you stand by it, it should be good. I mean, if you're doing something that doesn't harm the people around you, and it helps and benefits the people around you, then morally it can't really be wrong, can it? Morally. I mean, a lot of these moral questions are normally not moral at all, in my eyes. They're jealousy questions. It's a question of, you've got it, I want it, Morally, I should have it, therefore, morally. Sorry. At the end of the day, anyone want to chop an arm off and get one of these, go for it. I don't see any takers. Because this doesn't do this. This doesn't feel my wife's hand when I hold it. Scratching my bum is fraught with danger. Morally, I think, once you get it to the stage where we are enjoying our lives, then morals tend to be second and pushed away. If you do what's right, do what's right. You don't need someone telling you. If what you do puts a frown on someone's face, you're doing it wrong. If what you do puts a smile on someone's face, you're probably not far off the mark, morally. That's how I see it.
Go, Nigel.
Point on religion.
Okay. So I'll just speak about that question about moral enhancement, because I think it's a beautiful example of my overall theme that I've been banging on about this evening, which is technocracy. One of the key, what's the word? Characteristics of technocracy is the techno-fix mentality. Any problem, or a misconceived problem rather, I would say, technocrats always tend to think of every problem in a technical way, so that it can be fixed by technical means. That's their tool. It's the old proverb: if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks to you like a nail. Technocrats always, think of ways of techno-fixing everything. Human beings are not very nice sometimes. We'll fix them with our, hormones and our genetic enhancements and whatever. No, thank you. Let's create a society which doesn't utterly encourage all the bad aspects of human behaviour. We're never going to eliminate, human bad behaviour, but we don't have to have a society which is based on, at the bottom, calling something utterly irrational greed, rational. That's the basis of economic theory. We need to change society so that we can be better people, not fix ourselves with neurochemicals.
And Steve, to the religion.
Okay. First, a small thing on the moral enhancement. I'm not crazy about the idea, because in practice it does tend to be just a matter of manipulating neurotransmitters and things like this. But I do believe that as a social policy thing, it may be on the horizon if the governments determine that the kinds of methods that you're talking about, Dave, are just too expensive, take too long, and there might be quicker fixes by doing a little gene therapy, a little antenatal screening, and so the efficiency arguments with regard to cash-strapped states might actually, improve the standing of what I agree is a fairly dubious notion. So, you've got to watch that space with regard to moral enhancement. It's not going to go away. But with regard to the religion thing, from my own standpoint, I see transhumanism as very, very consistent with the sort of the sort of special place of human beings in Judeo-Christian theology and so forth. And there's so much of that language that's still there. And if you actually go through the history, and that you will see quite a lot of continuity, and that's very much and I think one of the things about transhumanism at the moment, in terms of the people who tend to be transhumanists, is that they tend to be kind of knee-jerk atheists in a way, and kind of as a result do not quite see kind of the larger metaphysical implications of the sort of beings they're trying to promote, in terms of where do you get this idea that human beings ought to be above animals, right? Where does that idea come from historically? Right? It's not just simply a matter, I want to do it, therefore I should do it. Right? There is a kind of conception of what a human being is that does involve always overcoming barriers and transcending limits and things of that kind. And where you go for the source of those ideas is theology.
Before the debate moves to the bar, I'd like to invite Adrian Chirok up, who I met in 2012. He's been doing some fantastic work. He's going to live demo a piece you probably heard about on the press recently. So Adrian, thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke, for inviting me. And the work that we're doing in our lab at the City University of London is basically, can we take the internet, which is very much about audio and vision, can we expand that to all of our senses, to touch and even taste and smell? I think in the future that we will communicate with all of our 5 senses through the internet. So today we will show you some demonstrations where we can connect the internet with digital data to taste and smell. Why is taste and smell very important? We heard a lot about the brain and emotion today with the great panel we had. Smell and taste are the only 2 senses connected to the limbic system of the brain, which means that a smell and taste can directly affect your mood or your memory. And we miss this when we only communicate through screens of the internet. So we're going to show you today a device we developed, which is you can send someone a message, and not only does it have a text message, but it's a smell. So you can send someone, your friend, a smell of a flower if you're in a good mood, or if you're in a bad mood, maybe smell a bitter smell. So I'll give you a quick demo here. You can see the smell coming from the device, and you can try this for yourself. And also, this is still chemical based, so it has some problem because you have to refill it. But what we're working on is, can we make smell and taste completely digital? So we're working with a device which you can also try yourself, and it basically stimulates your taste perception without any chemicals. You put this electrode on your tongue, like that, and we'll watch this before you try it, with alcohol. And so it electrically stimulates your taste receptor so that you receive a taste perception without any chemicals. So the advantage of that is that you can then transmit taste without any chemicals. It means you can transmit it through the internet. And so you can try the demo. We're also working on the next step, is a device that you put at the back of your mouth underneath the palatine bone, and it will magnetically stimulate your olfactory bulb to produce artificial smell without chemicals. We're not going to put electrodes because the olfactory bulb is in the back of your nasal cavity, so it will be very painful to put electrodes there. But this device will be non-invasive. So please come and try our demos. We're at the back. You can see my student there waving his hands, and you can try these demos for yourself in digital taste and smell. So thank you very much.
Adrian was in Japan before, and he's recently moved to London, so we were just really lucky to catch that he was on the attendee list. So please go to the back and try out some of these devices, smell and taste the internet. So the bar is open until 10:30, but before we all race to the bar, I want to thank the panel, me and Albison.